Hello, this is Dorie Clark, and we are here for another weekly edition of Better, which is Newsweek's interview show talking about how to make your life and your career better in all of the possible ways. And we are here this week talking with Whitney Johnson about how to develop your talent and the talent around you. She's the author of the new book, Smart Growth. Whitney Johnson, so glad to have you here.
Dorie, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, if you are watching and dialing in here live, please feel free to type into the chat box and let us know who you are, where you are dialing in from, and also any questions that you have for Whitney Johnson about her book, Smart Growth, and about talent development in general. We are going to be diving into all of the issues. And Whitney, a place that I wanted to start, you actually say in your book, I think this might even be the first sentence of Smart Growth, that growth is our default setting. What does this mean? Because it seems like it's so hard sometimes for people to actually do it. If it's our default setting, why? What's the disconnect here?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I will start by saying we are wired to grow. If you look at someone asked me this the other day, and I my first comment was, well, this was a little bit of a vast intuitive leap of like, I just know it's true. So then I had to go find all the science to back us up. But basically, if you look at neuroplasticity, you know that our brains are wired to grow, our brains are wired to change. And so it is our default setting. We are meant to grow. And I think that the challenge is that even though they're wired to grow, they're also wired to feel safe. And so we have these opposing forces. And then the question becomes is, do we use our free will, our sense of agency to overcome the piece of our brain that wants to run away from anything that seems scary that would prevent us from growing? So that's what I mean by growth is our default setting.
Interesting. Whitney Johnson, thank you very much. She's the author of Smart Growth, joining us. And we want to say hi to some of the great folks who are tuning in from around the world to join us. We're so happy to have you here. We've got Scott from Baltimore, Bill's here from Scranton, Rosinda from Madrid. We have a LinkedIn user from New York City. Filippo is joining us from Italy. Shams is in San Luis Obispo. We've got Calgary in the house. Hector from Costa Rica. Adnan from Turkey. Annette is here from Southern California, and many more. We're so glad to have you. Please type your questions for author Whitney Johnson into the chat box. We want to know what's on your mind. Now, Whitney, one of the common denominators of your work, you've written and spoken about this before, is the concept of the S curve and
Yeah.
how this ties in with talent and talent development. For those who might not be familiar with it, can you explain what an S curve is and what this has to do with thinking about ourselves and our teams in terms of our growth?
Right. What the heck is an S curve? Is that what you're saying? That's what you're asking?
Basically, that's right. Bring it.
All right. So the S curve was originally popularized by Everett Rogers back in the 50s and 60s. And he used it to help figure out how quickly groups would change over time. And we used it at our Disruptive Innovation Fund to help us figure out how quickly an innovation would be adopted. Well, as we were investing, I had this insight that can we use this S curve to think about how we learn and how we grow? That every time you start something new, you're at the base of an S. And so let me just trace it for you very quickly. You start something new, you're at the base of the S. Let's see if I can draw this for you. And so this is the place where growth is going to feel slow. It's going to feel like a slog. You're going to wonder, why did I decide to do this? It's not that it's not happening, it's just that it's slow. So that's the launch point. Then you move into the steep part of the curve. And this is that part where all of your neurons are firing. It feels exhilarating. It's hard, but not too hard. And so this is the sweet spot where growth feels, and it is fast and it feels fast. And then you get to mastery. And that is the place where you've figured a few things out. You're no longer overwhelmed. Now you might be a little bit underwhelmed. You're no longer enjoying the feel good effects of learning. And so growth is again slow. Well, it's actually now slow. So at the launch point, it feels slow. In the sweet spot, it feels fast and is fast. And in mastery, growth is slow. And when you understand that, it becomes this very simple, very visual model for us to picture what growth looks and feels like, the emotional arc of growth. And that allows us to become better.
Yes. Good callback, by the way. Very nice.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Oh, I love that. Well, the S curve is definitely a useful concept, and in fact, this is one of my favorite things to do as well, is to take enterprise level business concepts and apply them to our own lives and careers. In fact, in my first book, Reinventing You, that was pretty much what I did, was take all the branding and marketing techniques that I would use in consulting for companies and saying, well, what would it look like if we applied them to an individual? And so I love it that you do that as well, Whitney. Right on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. It's so fun too because and I suspect that we were doing this almost in parallel because when I was working on Wall Street, I was an equity analyst. I came across Tom Peters, a brand called You, which you probably know very well. And I thought, wait a second, let's not just think about momentum of stocks, let's think about momentum of people. And then took the framework of disruption, applied it to people. And like you said, now the S curve to people. So we're going down these parallel paths.
Absolutely. We are here with Whitney Johnson. You can learn more about her at whitneyjohnson.com. And her new book is called Smart Growth. You can check it out all of the places that books are sold. If you are enjoying this conversation, please hit the like button and the share button so that your friends on whatever social media network you are watching this on can also benefit from the great conversation with Whitney about how to develop your own talent and the talent around you. And we want to say hi to some of the great folks who are tuning in to join us. We have Michelle here from California. We have Peterborough, UK in the house. Freddie's here from Fort Lauderdale. Ivana from New York. We've got John here. We've got Marion from Atlanta. Sabrina from North Carolina. Dana from Ipswich. We've got Kristen from Dallas. Kathleen Cruz is here. Robin's here from Florida, and many more. We're so glad to have you. And type your questions into the chat box for author Whitney Johnson. Now, Whitney, you were alluding a moment ago to one of the other concepts besides the S curve that
Mm.
you have really sort of made your own when it comes to career development. You, of course, spent a lot of time working with the late Clayton Christensen, who was the creator of the concept of disruptive innovation and really popularized that at the corporate level. You have, in your previous books, one was called Disrupt Yourself, in fact, talked about the need to apply those principles in our own lives. Now, for a lot of people, when they hear disruption, that doesn't sound like a good
No,
thing. That doesn't sound very
yeah.
desirable, but you claim it is. Tell us why.
Yes, it is. If you want to become better, see, I'm going to do the callback 3 times. I'll find one more time to do it. All right. So if you're thinking about growth and I want to grow, and now you've got this map of what growth looks like, the S curve of learning. Disruption comes into play in 2 instances. Number one is when you get to the top of an S curve, you completed the growth cycle. If you want to continue to grow, you will need to disrupt yourself and jump to the bottom of a new curve. So that's disruption or self-disruption writ large. But there's also these micro disruptions that you do is all along that growth curve. We have a personal disruption framework. There are 7 accelerants, and those micro disruptions become the mechanism by which you make progress. You step back from who you are to slingshot into who you want to be by doing things like figuring out how to embrace your constraints, leveraging failure, playing to your distinctive strengths, and taking the right risks. And so that's when I talk about personal disruption, what I'm saying is you are both the incumbent and the upstart. You're both Goliath and David. And with personal disruption, you are disrupting you. And it's a good thing because it's the mechanism by which you make progress, by which you step back in order to move forward.
I love it. Sometimes we have to be willing to make those changes, even when they feel very risky in the moment. So thank you for that, Whitney. And to the point of S curves and where we are in our growth cycle, Annette actually had an interesting question. I believe this is specifically about maybe the ideation around your new book, Smart Growth, or the process of it. But she wants to know, Whitney, can you talk about your own S curve growth experience with Smart Growth? How did you come up with the idea for this? Where are you falling right
Yeah.
now?
Yeah,
How
with
do you
this
apply
book.
this to your own life?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Net. Nice to see you. So what I would say with the book itself is in the prior 2 books, Disrupt Yourself, Build an A Team, the S curve was there, but it was very much in the background. It was kind of this script that was powering things, but it was a supporting actor. And one of the things that happened is that as I would go out and talk to people, do workshops, do keynotes, people kept coming back to the S curve. I remember going on Dan Pink's Pinkcast, and he said, "Let's talk about the S curve." Even though I said we're talking about building teams, and so there was this thought of, "Oh, we need to write about this." And so you could argue I was on one S curve of going in one direction, talking about teams, and I had someone kind of push me, or multiple people push me and say, "No, you need to write about this." But then you decide to write about it, and you make the decision, we're going to write about this book. And there's all this messiness. Anybody who has ever written a book ever will know there is a lot of time spent at the launch point figuring out, what do I want to say? How do I want to say it? And how do I begin? And it took, I would say, a good 3 to 6 months of sort of, even though I knew these ideas, 3 to 6 months of figuring out how I wanted to talk about this. And then moved into the sweet spot. But I will say, when we were close to the end, this step back came when I had a friend review the book and eviscerate the book and say, "This is not the book that you want it to be. You say you're a writer, be a writer." And I was so grateful, because then I was able to take that information, incorporate it, and now I have a book that I feel is a great book.
That's so interesting, Whitney. And, props to you, because certainly a lot of people, if they were thinking that they were at the finish line and then a friend said, actually, no, might be very discouraging. But it sounds like you use that as a further lever to propel yourself forward. Out of curiosity, what would you say was wrong, quote unquote, with the first draft of the book? And what did you change to make it even better in the version that we now see of Smart Growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there were two things. Number one is that there were a number of places where I was in my head talking 3 or 4 steps ahead of people. So I was making all sorts of assumptions of prior knowledge. And she said, you can't assume that people are in your head. So you've got to walk it back and be much more explicit about what it is you're saying. The second thing that happened is that she said, I don't think she used this word, but this is the word that stuck in my mind. It sounded too chirpy. And what do I mean by that? I have had all these experiences, many of which have been challenging, that I live with, and I have assimilated and grown from them. But I didn't have any of those experiences in the book. And so it came off as, well, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and life will be grand. She said, no, you have to include those experiences so that you are both relatable and credible. And so I went back, and for example, and there's a couple of stories in the Explorer chapter about making a very bad business decision and losing hundreds of thousands of dollars that would not be in the book without that little nudge from my friend Julie Berry.
Oh, wow. That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Whitney. I appreciate it. We are here with Whitney Johnson. If you want to learn more about her and about her new book, Smart Growth, you can go to her website. It's whitneyjohnson.com. And if you want to make sure you're never missing one of our weekly Newsweek interview shows, you can just go to dorieclark.com, sign up for my email list there. You can get a free self-assessment, and you will get reminders about our regular Thursdays at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, and all the great guests. We also want to say hello to some of the awesome people who are tuning in from around the world. We have Seyi from Nigeria. We have Vasmi Jahan tuning in from Baku, Azerbaijan. Megan's here from Greater Boston. We have Cincinnati in the house. We have Cheryl from Minneapolis. We have Mona here. Carlos is in Colombia. We've got Jennifer. Diane is here from Cleveland. Estelle from France. We have London. Andreas is here from Cyprus, and many more. So thank you so much for joining us. And Whitney, a great question came in from from Tammy. Hi, Tammy. Tammy wants to know, can you be on several S curves at once? I feel like I'm there. How would you relate to that?
Tammy, yes, you can. If you think about from an S curve perspective, it's really a fractal. Your life is an S curve and your day is an S curve. And so at any given time, you can be on a professional S curve, you can be on a hobby. So, for example, Dorie, I know that you are a playwright, you're a Broadway investor, you're an author, you're a coach. Those are all different S curves that you're on. And so our lives are really these portfolio of S curves, as are our teams, by the way. Every single person on your team is on an S curve. And so you've got this portfolio of S curves as a team. But yes, you personally can be on multiple S curves. And then you make this decision, just like you would with a stock portfolio, how to optimize them. If you've got one part of your life that is taking all of your energy, I know you said, for example, you are just moved and you're trying to decorate your house. That's probably taking a lot of energy. So you may have less energy for other S curves. So you think about it as a portfolio that you optimize. And the answer is yes, Tammy, you can be on multiple S curves at once.
That's great. Thank you for that, Whitney. And Kathleen had a similar question. So I think this is on the minds of a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that. I also wanted to tap here Marion, who had a question. Marion is curious, can you speak to the self-disruption point a bit more, especially when you're communicating with other people? They might not get it. They might say, what are you doing? So if we've got skeptics out there, Whitney, or maybe
Yeah.
they're not skeptical, but they're just confused, why would we disrupt ourselves? How could we respond to those people in a way that might help make sense of it?
Yeah, Marion, it's such a great question. And I know when I left Wall Street, I was an equity analyst, I was award winning, and I said to my boss, I'm going to leave my job and become an entrepreneur. And I remember she said to me, basically, have you lost your mind? Well, here's what's happening, and here's how you can help people around you think about this. And then I'm going to give you a tip on how to manage that. So, whenever you disrupt yourself, here's what's happening. You are on this Y axis of success. And let's say your life is going along at over one, up one, over one, up one. And so, for example, my life, it was doing all the functional jobs that I needed to do. I was able to put food on the table. I felt this sense of standing and belonging in the community. But there was an emotional job that was not being done. And that's oftentimes why we choose to disrupt ourselves. And in this particular instance, I was ready to grow. I had gone to my boss and said, hey, I want to take on some new things. And they said, we like you right where you are. It's like, okay, well, if you like me right where I am, I think I'm going to go right where I am somewhere else. And so what happens when you disrupt yourself is you are going from here on the y-axis, you're coming down, let's say from a 12 to a 10, because you believe that in the future, you're going to be over one, up three, or over one, up five. Now, how do you socialize this with people around you? Possibly your family, possibly your friends. When you disrupt yourself, you are by definition disrupting the people around you. When you want to jump to a new curve, you are requiring, in some instances, the people around you to jump to a new curve as well. And so one of the jobs that's incumbent upon us is a willingness to pack a parachute for them. Here's why I'm doing this. Here's why it's important to me. Here's how I'm going to make it easier for you as I'm doing this so that it doesn't feel quite so scary. It makes sense to you. We've got savings, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the theory behind personal disruption. Oftentimes there's an emotional job not being done. And then when you're doing it, you want to pack a parachute for the people around you so that as you're disrupting yourself, you make it safe for them to disrupt themselves.
That's a really great point, Whitney, because obviously there are consequences to the disruption that sort of echo out from around your actions. So it's useful to be mindful and aware of that. We're here talking with Whitney Johnson. She's the author of the new book, Smart Growth. If you're liking this conversation, please hit the like button, hit the share button. And also, I'm curious, I'd love to hear you type into the chat box and see what's on your mind. How are you disrupting yourself? We'd love to hear what everyone here is doing so we can learn together. And we want to say hi to some of the great folks tuning in. Tanya's here from Sacramento. We've got Yvonne, who's joining us from Mexico. We have Margaret, who is here from New York City. Christine from Rochester. Monique from Hampton, Virginia. Abdul from Pakistan. We're so glad to have all of you. If you're just joining us, type your name and where you're from come into the chat box. We're glad to have you. And we're talking with Whitney Johnson about the concept of how to develop the talent around you. Whitney, one key point: a lot of the people who are watching this may themselves be leaders. They may have employees. Certainly, they have colleagues that they're trying to influence. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you are trying to lead smart growth, not just for yourself, but for the people around you, what are the steps that you can take to help facilitate that and create a culture of smart growth in the sphere that you can influence?
Yeah. So let me give you a quick example. I think really illustrates this. So as many of you are picking up on, you can use this as an artifact to talk about not only your growth but the growth of your people, the people on your team. And so an example is Sumit Shetty. He is a development mid-level manager at SAP in India. And so whenever he has someone brand new on his team, he has a conversation with them about what are your goals, what are your aspirations, what's your why, and then he figures out and he identifies where are you on the S curve, and has this conversation with them of where do you think you are in terms of what you want to accomplish and need to accomplish in the role. Here's where I think you are in terms of domain expertise and also collaborating with the team. And then also he administers the S curve insight tool, our assessment that allows people to see, well, where am I presenting? So here's where I think I am, but where am I presenting? And so you now have this conversation that can take place of where do I think you are? Where does the assessment say you are? Where do you think you are? And that allows you to start thinking about, all right, well, I'm at the launch point. What do I need to gain momentum off the launch point? What we find is people typically need lots of support, words of encouragement. They need training. They need you to value their inexperience. If people are in the sweet spot, what do they need? They need focus, prioritization. And if they're in mastery, they need a challenge. And one of the things that we often find is that I, as a manager, might think, oh, this person is doing an amazing job. Tammy is doing an amazing job. She's in the sweet spot. But if Tammy presents in mastery, she's saying, I'm bored. I need something new to do. And that is going to predict her behavior, not where I think she is. And so back to Sumit Shetty, when he has this as an assessment, it starts that conversation around development. And then you as a manager are investing in them. They feel invested in you. And also, I'm sure you all have surmised, this becomes a really, really valuable retention tool. Because if people feel like there is growth upside, they are much less likely to leave.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Whitney Johnson, thank you. She's the author of the new book, Smart Growth. We want to say hi to some of the great folks tuning in. Tom is joining us from Chicagoland, Mayada from Dallas. We have Anita from Canada, Eduardo from Mexico, Pankaj from India. We've got Javad from Iran. We're so glad to have all of you. And Whitney, Kathleen had a great question that I think is probably on a lot of people's minds. She's curious, what next step decision criteria do you suggest for people who are on a curve that isn't complete, but you feel like you're stalled or you're thinking it's not on track? If you're somewhere, stuck in this S and it's not going the way you think it should, what should you do then?
Yeah. Oh, Kathleen, it's a great question. So I'm going to answer that in two parts. So the first thing that I want you to be considering is it possible that it's not the right S curve? So you're stalled out because right now this isn't the right place for you. And so some questions that you can ask yourself is, from an exploratory standpoint, is this in sync with my identity, my values? And we talk about this in the book in the first chapter. And then you want to do some collection of data. Are you able to get the resources that you need in order for you to move into the acceleration part of that S curve? And so that's the first thing that I would ask you to consider is maybe it's no longer the right S curve for you and you're stalling out for a reason. If you decide to jump to a new curve, remember that no S curve is ever wasted. The second thing I would say is if you're on this curve and you feel like you're not getting to completion, you feel like you're stalling out. By the way, I do think that this is some of what's happening to many people in the world right now is we've been on this S curve, then COVID hit, and we've been grappling with COVID. And there are many people we've talked about the great resignation. I think it's the great aspiration where people are saying, I want more. I do think there is an element of people just saying, I'm just tired. I'm tired. And so I'm stalled out because I'm tired. And so one thing I would say is you're on this mountain of an S curve. Maybe you just need to take a break. You need to rest. Tiffany Shlain calls rest as a technology. Step back, zoom out, and just take a quick breather. That may very well be the thing that you need to get the momentum and the energy that you need in order to move into completion along the curve. And do not dismiss the importance of having getting advice like I did with my book. It was stalled in the sense that I knew it could be a great book, but I didn't know quite what I needed to do. And so when I was willing to turn it over to someone and say, you're an expert, take a look at this, knowing that she could rip it up, and she did, but that gave me what I needed. It gave me the information I needed so that I could complete that curve. And so if it's the right curve, you may just need a break. And if it's the right curve, you may want to go out and get advice from other people. You're moving up that mountain. Maybe you need a Sherpa for a minute or two so that you can complete the growth cycle.
I love that. That's really helpful, Whitney. I'm curious, in terms of your own professional career, it seems like you've been banging out books. We had Dare Dream Do, and we have A Team, and we have Disrupt Yourself, and we've got Smart Growth now. How do you pace yourself? How do you actually think about, you were alluding to, yeah, maybe you need like a little break. You need to sit down on the mountain of the S curve
Yeah,
and catch
yeah.
your breath. How do you think about pacing your own professional career?
Are you talking about books specifically or just my career?
Any and all, any
However I
and all.
want to
We
answer that
inquiring minds
question,
want to
right?
know.
Yeah. So I would say right now I have a 10-year plan. We have this business. It's Disruption Advisors. We have a technology tool, that the assessment that I talked about, this S Curve Insight platform that is very useful for leaders in building their team and configuring their teams, that we talked about actually in Harvard Business Review this month. And so we've got this 10-year plan to really build this out. And so having that 10-year plan, knowing that we're in the process of developing this technology, we've got all the different resources around it, the coaching, the speaking, et cetera. That's the goal. That's the big S curve. That's the summit of the mountain from that perspective. But then there are all these micro S curves along the way. There's this book, and then there will be the next book. So there's a micro curves. I think the bigger question you're asking me is, how do I pace myself from week to week, from day to day? I think perhaps the most important thing that I do, I'm not great at taking vacations. I'm working on it. But what I do is that every day I have one day a week that is my Sabbath. Um, Tiffany Shlain calls it a technology Shabbat, where she unplugs for a week. For me, it's Sunday. I go to church and practice my faith tradition. But that willingness to unplug and to do something different and to take some type of Shabbat a week is what allows me to restore so that I can continue to move up the mountain. Oh, and then there's one other thing I do.
What's
In the
that?
evenings with my husband and my daughter, we watch Korean dramas. That restores me.
That is an unexpected one to pull from your back pocket, Whitney. I like it. That is great. Well, we have time perhaps for just one more rapid fire question. We've been
Right.
here with Whitney Johnson. She's the author of the new book, Smart Growth. And Gina had a question, Whitney. She's curious, if you're disrupting yourself, is there a way that we can actually communicate more effectively with our colleagues and sort of bring them along so that they understand it's a good thing, not a bad thing?
Yeah. Oh, Gina, it's a great question. So I said a few minutes ago, this idea of when you're jumping to a new S curve, you're asking someone else to jump to a new S curve as well. In this instance, you want to think of them as a customer and say, okay, well, what jobs are they trying to get done? They're trying to do some functional jobs. They're trying to do some emotional jobs. So if you can put yourself in their shoes and say, all right, if I jump to a new curve, how is this going to help them? Well, it might help them because they've got some other people on their team they want to continue to develop and they don't want to lose. It will help them because they are now going to be known throughout the organization as a person who develops talent. And they'll have an advocate, an ally in other parts of the organization. You can also help by thinking strategically of here's what it's going to look like. I'm going to go do this and develop this. And here's how my departure, and this takes a lot of confidence because you're basically saying, I'm replaceable, but here's how this new person can plug in. I'll help you think about what that looks like. And so I'm going to leave you, here we go, better than before. Third call out.
Whoa, you nailed it. You called your pitch, you brought it home. We have been here with Whitney Johnson. She's the author of the new book, Smart Growth. Get it now. Check it out now. You can learn more about Whitney and all of her work at whitneyjohnson.com. Thank you all for tuning in. And thank you, Whitney Johnson, for being our guest this week on Better.
Thank you for having me. And it was great questions, everybody. It was a delight.
Thank you, and see you all next week. Take care.